All right, hey folks. So today we're going to be talking about some misconceptions about size and strength training, and this misunderstood idea that somehow you have to either train to be strong or train to be big. And not only can you not do both at once, but they're actually mutually exclusive, which I think is completely wrong. So I want to explore that a little bit. So firstly, I had this comment from Omar, who's one of the regular viewers on YouTube. And it was a really good question. It was about the conjugate series that I put together. And he said, great series, Faz. Is this more for strength training or for bodybuilding too? And I replied, and this is what I believe. I think as a natural, you probably don't have the luxury of that choice. They're synergistic. Basically, it's highly likely you'll need to push both. And that is my stance. That's what I believe. I think as a natural, you're going to have to pull both. Now, I got a reply. I took that. So I screenshotted it from YouTube and I posted it onto my Instagram, and I got a reply from a guy that I know, and he puts himself down as a strength coach, and he said that his point of view was that pushing low volume to get strong means you'll end up smaller. And he said, what do you think about that? And I said, well, yeah, that's not how a natural guy gets strong. If you push low volume in an effort to get stronger, you're going to get detrained, fat, weak, and probably injured. So that's not how elite strength is built. So I'm not really sure where you're coming from with that statement. And it got me thinking about this misconception between size and strength. And I think it originates from drugs in bodybuilding. And I want to just make the case for that and just give you guys a bit of a chat about the sort of the history. So if you look at bodybuilding competitions up to around about the 1950s, bodybuilding shows had a strength element to them. So you can see old accounts online of Reg Park doing bodybuilding shows and demonstrations, and then hitting a 500-pound bench press like on the same day, straight after or straight before. So generally, bodybuilding and strength was very much intertwined. The guys you saw on stage who were jacked generally could lift a lot of weight as well. I mean, you take that right back to Eugene Sandow. He was what we all now know from history as the first bodybuilder. I mean, he is what the Sandow Trophy is named after, and he was a strongman. He was an exhibitionist, and he did lots of strong feats. He just looked jacked as well. He was one of the first strongmen back then who was actually pretty shredded too. So we had this idea back then that to be bigger, you've got to be stronger, and they sort of went hand in hand. And the public, that's what the public saw. They saw these strong men who were also massive and jacked. There was no separation between the two. What threw a wrench in that public perception was drugs. From about the 50s onwards, drugs sort of seeped in through from weightlifting, and they got involved in the sport of bodybuilding. Now, the thing with the drugs is, with the drugs, they give you that neural drive via the sort of androgenic push that you get, whatever it is. You get a sort of like you get a neural strengthening from the androgens, and they give you the strength. So if you just carry on strength training, well, you're going to get hurt because your strength is already elevated. You don't have to do the single repetitions, the low volume, the low repetitions, because your strength is already being developed just via the androgens that you're taking. So if you carry on pushing strength in your training, like a Reg Park might do, or some guys before him, then you're going to get hurt because your strength will increase so dramatically fast because your muscles are expanding super fast. Now, from the 50s onwards, what you saw some accounts of people training, sort of cross training, like Arnold was a very famous example of this in his book. He said that once or twice, or maybe once every month or every 2 months, he would go out into the woods with all of his training partners and some girls, and they would like lift really heavy weights and max out on the bench, max out on whatever, and drink and whatever else, right? So, but in general, it was kind of phased out. After the introduction of drugs into the sport, most of the relationship between strength and size was starting to separate. And I think it was because in the mainstream, where you got most of these guys who were drugged up bodybuilders, in the mainstream, they typically weren't doing that. Like they weren't doing the strength and size stuff anymore, because slowly they realized if they just carried on pushing the strength stuff, they'd get injured. And they didn't need to push the strength stuff because they were taking the drugs. So they just pushed the size stuff. So from that point of view, as we know, we kind of get most people get most of their information from what's in the mainstream. And so from that moment onwards, strength and size was sort of forever in the mainstream separated. because originally pre-50s they were together. And if you saw a strongman, in a magazine or whatever, you assumed like you saw him, he was pretty jacked. And if you saw a guy who was pretty jacked, you assume he was going to be pretty strong, and the relationship was very much together. After the introduction of drugs into the sport and the separation of strength training versus size training, probably due to more and more injuries and people not wanting to go there, that relationship was forever split due to public perception. We need to bring them back together. My sort of point with all of this is that the damaging thing is that when they're separated out, so when people view training as either training for strength or for training for size, they're missing out on the key benefits of both. So like powerlifters, take for example, powerlifters should use a lot of hypertrophy work, a lot of it. Like once you've got some practice down with the lifts, and let's say you're doing some, I don't know, 1 to 5 to whatever sets of squats per week, the rest of the volume can be filled in by exercises which are going to make the muscles associated with the squat bigger. Now that goes doubly hand in hand if you've got a lift which you're not very genetically suited to. Like I've got fairly long limbs, so I'm not really the best suited to be a squatter. But what I do and what I have done with my clients who are built like me is I fill in the muscles with exercises like the leg press to build up the quads, to then make sure that the leverages aren't as much of a problem as they would normally be. So if you're not using sort of hypertrophy work as a powerlifter, you're really missing out. There's a ton. That's from one angle, but there's also the angle of injury prevention as well. Like if you've got a lagging body part, if you're a powerlifter, at some point that body part's probably going to go snap. So it's worthwhile filling that in with a lot of hypertrophy work to make it bigger. It's also, rehab, prehab, all that kind of stuff, which is really useful for a powerlifter to ensure that they are getting the benefit of bigger size while they're getting stronger, which just safeguards the body. And then for bodybuilders, and just talking about the natural ones here, they should utilize strength as well to push up that strength base to ensure that they can carry on getting bigger and bigger. It helps. There's a symbiotic relationship. We need to get away from this sort of idea of there being this separation. Now, the very first counterpoint that people will immediately jump to is to say that, to get strong, you need low volume, kind of like this strength coach who commented on my Instagram post. The thing is, where people misunderstand this is low volume and low repetition work is not to build strength, not exclusively. It's to peak strength. Now, if you have some low volume, low repetition work alongside a whole bunch of other stuff, like a lot of other volume, some background work, like you might do in a conjugate system, great. That's a great system to build strength as well. But my point is, the criticism that you need to train low volume, low repetition to build strength is a complete disaster. Like that's how you get detrained, fat, and injured. You use that to peak your strength, and you typically only peak for 1 or 2 weeks, and then you hit a competition. Like when I was competing in powerlifting, that's what I would do. I would train, really, really high volume until about 1 or 2 weeks out, and then I would begin a taper of volume and an increase of intensity. And at that stage, that would allow my strength that I'd built previously to be able to express itself in a peak. That's how you peak strength. It's not how you build strength. It's not like, okay, you know what? I trained for 8 months for this show. Yeah, 8 months, I pretty much just did some size work. And the last 2 weeks, I did strength work, and look how strong I am. That's not how it works. So yeah, that counterpoint doesn't really make any sense. And the other example of that actually was a guy in my comments recently who commented on my Dorian Yates video, and he said that he tried the Dorian Yates approach and he got stronger for a couple of months and then he got injured. It's like, yeah, that's what happens. Like you peaked your strength, you built from your previous high volume routine. You didn't build your strength in that 1 or 2 months. You just expressed it. That's all. Now, the next counterpoint is people will point out somebody who's famous and they're sorry, my cat's walking by the camera. they'll point out somebody who's famous and they're small, but they're very strong. And they'll say, look, Faz, actually, look at this guy. He's really strong, but he's really small. Yeah, well, you're not him. Just remember that, right? You're not that guy. That guy is genetically blessed for strength. It's nothing to do with his training. He's genetically blessed for strength. Yes, maybe he's not that big. He's more than likely natural, very well suited to actually strength gains. But point is, you're not him. You're still going to need to get bigger to get stronger. Okay, there's a difference. You can't just point out some other guy who's on the other side of the world and go, actually, well, that guy's small and strong, so I'm going to go and be small and strong. It doesn't work like that. That's not your body. That's not your physiology. Like, you still are going to need to get bigger to get stronger. You're still going to need to get stronger to get bigger. It's symbiotic. All right. So, yeah, I'm going to wrap that up there just to kind of summarize. I think, as I said originally, and as I said in the comment to Omar, as a natural, you probably don't have the luxury of training for either size or strength. And I really think you're doing yourself an injustice by training for one or the other. Train for both. They will help each other. Do it sensibly. Okay? Do it sensibly. Make sure you are pushing things with an eye towards prehab. Make sure you're doing all the recovery work right, and you will push your entire base up, and you should get simultaneously bigger and stronger. Now, where you end up, like if you end up being that guy who's 180 pounds and can deadlift, 700, that's just your genetics. It probably didn't have a great deal to do with your training. So where you end up is just whatever your genes allow. But in terms of how to get to your ultimate advanced form, that's got to come from size and strength training, I believe. And also, one last thing, the misconception that strength is built via low volume repetition, low repetition work exclusively, that needs to die. That is not how elite strength is built. That is not how I built my strength, but that's probably a topic for another video. So I'm going to call it there. I hope you guys find that interesting. Size and strength cannot be separated. Have a great day.